Maria, welcome to Mint. Thank you for being on. I'm so excited to have you.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, of course. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
I am too. You're making a lot of noise on crypto Twitter with your love for bored apes and your love for NFTs. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to dive in. Let's just get right into it. Give me a quick brief about yourself. Who are you? What were you doing before crypto, and like where are you now?
Yeah, sure. So right now I am an investment partner at a crypto focused VC firm called Electric Capital, where as you see from my Twitter, I'm super focused on NFTs, and we can totally talk about how I got into NFTs in the first place. But prior to Electric, I was co-founder and CTO of a supply chain startup. Before that, I was getting my master's in computer science. I spent some time at Microsoft on search tech as a PM, graduated from Harvard, studied political science and computer science. So yeah, I mean, my background mainly is in product and engineering, being an entrepreneur and now investing.
How did you go from the supply chain to crypto?
Yeah,
Because
excellent.
that's night and day. I know there's a lot of like overlap with blockchain technology and supply chain, but NFTs and supply chain, like, go ahead. What's the
No,
story?
excellent question. I didn't jump from supply chain to NFTs, but I did jump from supply chains to crypto. So, kind of the backstory here is I started my company back in like 2015, 2016. So if you take yourself back to that time, that was when direct to consumer products really rose to prominence, right? This is your Casper, this is your Warby Parker, this is people realizing all of a sudden, oh, I don't need to go work for Nike or Lululemon. Like I can actually market my products directly to people through Instagram and be able to actually reach a very wide audience. And so a lot of these small businesses were great at creating products, at thinking through who their users were, but not so great at their supply chain, at kind of actually creating the products en masse, or in many cases, even prototyping the products. And so my company at the time was effectively a supply chain backend for these small businesses. And so I worked with, I would say maybe about like 300 manufacturers across Asia, South America, Eastern Europe, and then thousands of small businesses use this system. And one of the really interesting problems that I kept, seeing over and over again was payments. So specifically, a lot of my small business customers were in the US, UK, and Canada. And so in order to pay a manufacturer overseas, like, obviously you have the problems that you can imagine, like foreign exchange is difficult, wiring is difficult. But actually the really, really painful problem is a lack of trust. These are small businesses that have never interacted with these manufacturers before, and these manufacturers have never interacted with these small businesses. It's not like H&M coming in and saying, hey, give me credit, I'm H&M, like, I'm good for it. For these manufacturers, they're like, I'm not so sure, and then small businesses are also unsure. So the kind of industry standard that was established is 30% upfront, or something like that, about 30% upfront and about 70% when you receive the goods. This made like zero people happy, right? Small business was like, what, like I'm paying 30%, who knows what I'm getting? And then the manufacturer's like, okay, I'm getting 30%, but I'm making 100% of the goods. So like, how does that make any sense? And so there's just like always this tension around payments. And so I thought back to when I was getting my master's in computer science. There was this one guy in my program who was very into Ethereum, like to the point where he was doing sessions for the rest of the class, just like on his own about smart contracts, right? He's like, listen to me guys, like smart contracts are the future. And at the time I was really focused on like big data and machine learning. And I was like, oh yeah, smart contracts, cool. You can like put rules on top of money, but like, not what I'm interested in. AI is the future. And then, once I kind of saw this problem with my customers and the manufacturers, I kind of thought back to smart contracts, and it was like, oh, well, actually, if you can write rules on top of value, like, shouldn't you just be able to do a really lightweight business escrow? And that would solve problems for both of these parties. It could be a really cheap and programmatic way to introduce escrow into the payment flow. And you would solve a lot of the like foreign transaction friction in terms of just moving money over across borders. So I was like, cool, okay, I'm going to integrate with an API. someone's got this. And I looked into it and it was like, no, the infrastructure was not ready. Fiat on-ramps and off-ramps were all over the place. KYC and AML, if you're trying to form some sort of cohesive experience, especially across borders, like that's just not going to happen. Manufacturers are we're barely using email. And so trying to get them to understand like custody of tokens, this is just really beyond the scope.
There's no chance. There's no chance.
Zero chance. So I was like, okay, well, this was a cool thought experiment, but like infrastructure isn't ready. But that is what got me down the crypto rabbit hole. Cause I was like, well, infrastructure can be built, right? But if the technology is there, then, that's real. And so after I stopped working on my company, that's really what I focused on is crypto. And I knew I really wanted to get into the industry. And so kind of here I am.
That's awesome. I got started in crypto also like your friend, just teaching classes on the weekends or in my free time. Like I used to write in Facebook groups. I read the Bitcoin white paper. If anybody wants to learn about how peer-to-peer transactions work, I rented this room on the university campus on Saturday at this time. Come hit me up. And like, there's something really like, forget about me, but there's something really about something special about your friend. Because imagine the amount of inspiration that he kind of shed through his passion, expressing and explaining something that he believed in so much, and how that kind of trickled down to the rest of the people in that room. And here you are.
No, I mean, absolutely. I think in retrospect, that's when everyone should have seen that crypto is going to be big, right? It's like when you kind of inspire that kind of fervor in people to go out of their way to educate other people. It's like this kind of religious fervor, right? And anything that kind of inspires that is actually incredible and worth studying and worth looking into.
Yeah. So when did you make your transition into VC?
So once I decided I wanted to get into crypto, I really was not considering VC at all. I was really looking at, hey, should I join a crypto startup? Should I do something on the product side? Should I start my own company in the crypto space? And so this was 2018 at this point, and I met Avichal Garg and Curtis Spencer, who are the founders of Electric Capital. And what I realized about being in crypto VC that maybe a lot of people don't realize is that there's actually a lot of building that you have to do inside. I mean, as just a very, very kind of elementary example, if you're a traditional VC, you don't have to worry about custody, right? Your custody is your bank. You just put the money in the bank, period. Like that, that's it. As a crypto VC, it's as not so simple, right? Like, what are you going to do? Hold millions of dollars on a USB stick? Like, probably not. And so just things that you really take for granted, that third-party providers exist for, at least in 2018, either didn't exist or was very, very under-supported. And I mean, today, right, still very under-supported.
So you're telling me you wouldn't wear your fund around your neck as a US listed? You wouldn't wear $25 million around your neck and just pimp it out like you would with a gold chain?
That actually might be the play, is like, instead of like a Rolex, like diamond studded watch, it should be a diamond studded USB stick. I think we're onto something. I think that's awesome. So I mean, there's just so much infrastructure to build, right? And not only, so that's just like internally, but then externally, I mean, the industry is moving in real time. Like, things are being discovered in real time. And so any contribution you make in the space is almost just like putting something down in a history book.
Right.
And that kind of excitement, especially on the VC side, I have this privilege of being able to look across the board at what's happening in crypto at large. And there's always so many interesting things happening that honestly, I had trouble really focusing on working on one specific idea was going to be very difficult for me.
Yeah.
And so kind of this marriage between being able to look at a bunch of things and also being able to build. So a lot of us at Electric actually write a lot of code as well. And so being able to actually exercise that muscle, it was just the right combination for me personally.
You talk about, as you ship something, it becomes a part of history, right? Show me another industry that's like that, that it's so fresh, so early.
Yeah.
There's a lack of talent, real genuine talent.
Yeah.
And we're seeing this happen live. The best example that comes to mind is obviously PartyBid, right? And the beautiful social interactions that they created from like a multiplayer bidding platform, right? Another great example is Fractional, right? And really solving tangible use cases and seeing the sheer market validation that comes with that is inspiring. And it's a lot of the reason why I entered crypto is even if I could just contribute with a grain of salt, I know that grain of salt would be tasted because in the
Yes.
grand scheme
Yes.
of things, like it's so early, so fresh, and just get in there and just build something. I love you. I
Absolutely.
love your story so far. That's fascinating.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, really any topic in crypto can be an area of study, right? And I think it will be. Like, I think they're like in, colleges in the future, people will be studying crypto economics as its own
Right.
independent field. There will be countless PhD theses like written on this topic. And that's just one of, I don't know, hundreds, if not thousands of different topics, right? The game theory of like creating incentive mechanisms, even just like the depth of the tech that exists, like really any direction you look in, is something new being created. And I mean, to your point earlier, I really don't know another industry where this is happening.
Let's pivot into the topic of NFTs. Okay. I know you love NFTs and I want to hear why. Like, what is it about these, whether they be 721s, 1159s, future standards to come? Why are you so like attached to these cool collectibles? What is it about it for you?
It's funny you should ask that because I've never been a collectibles person, but I think that's actually what's really cool about NFTs is you're not just because you're NFTs doesn't mean you're a collectibles person. So I mean, I was first exposed to NFTs with like CryptoKitties, right? CryptoKitties came and I was like, oh, this is cool. Played around with it, bought a few CryptoKitties, bred a few CryptoKitties, and I was like, okay, cool. But how I kind of really fell in was back in 2018. Crypto voxels was around, and I'm a huge kind of sci-fi reader, as is a lot of people in crypto, I think. And I'm a huge fan of Snow Crash, and so this idea of the metaverse is just like insanely cool to me. And crypto voxels is a metaverse, right? Is kind of this digital world where your avatar gets dropped inside and you can just walk around, and the land itself, these parcels are NFTs and you can own parcels. And if you own a parcel, you can build on top of that and build all sorts of creative buildings. People create all sorts of amazing architecture on top of their own parcels. And so that's really what I first did was like, I just walked around and I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is the metaverse. And what was funny is that Crypto Voxels was really early in integrating with NFT marketplaces and NFT platforms. So people could embed their own NFTs within their Crypto Voxel architecture, effectively turning the entire Crypto Voxel metaverse into one gigantic gallery or like one gigantic museum. And so I would literally spend all of this time walking around, looking at art, like clicking through the walls and being like, oh, what's this NFT?
Right.
And that's how that's kind of how I first kind of fell into it, is through the metaverse angle more than anything else.
Yeah. Were you buying plots of land yourself
Yeah.
and like building on top of them? Yeah. Do you remember how much the first plot of land you bought was for?
It was, I think I spent something like $200. And this was after so what had happened is I kept watching this land. I was like, I should buy one. And I'm like, that's nonsense. Why would I buy digital land? It's worthless. And then I was like, I just couldn't help myself, which again, I think when you have that kind of feeling, like there's something kind of interesting happening there. And I was just watching the prices go up and I was like, no, I have to. $200 is like an insane amount of money to be spending on digital land, but I'm just going to go for it. It's going to be a total loss, whatever. I'm willing to take it. And so, yeah, so that was, I think, around the prices when I first started buying some parcels. I think they're like over 1,000. I actually don't check the prices that often, but
can we talk about the addiction of spending ETH for a minute? Like,
yes. Yes.
like I would rather pay $1,000 in gas fees than pay $300 for a flight. Like, I don't know why. What's up with like the psychology behind that?
Yeah.
But it's so much easier spending my ETH than it is spending my US dollars.
Yeah.
Do you feel the same?
Absolutely. I mean, this is like very embarrassing to admit, but like when I go to Chipotle, I don't get the guac because I'm like, I'm not going to spend $2. Like this is, this is a scam. I'm not spending $2 on guac. I remember one time, this is like during the height of the NFT craze, right? I did something, and this is when like gas fees were like atrocious, like hundreds of dollars. I did something and like the gas fee was like $60. I'm like, oh my gosh,
God,
like
like,
what a
what
steal. Like,
is
yeah,
this?
like, fill this order. There is like I think it's like very well documented, like not officially, but so many people have talked about this feeling where it's like, like I would never spend $20 on this like very normal, reasonable thing, but $2,000 on a JPEG,
Like,
like
why
yeah,
not?
yeah, that's
It's a
below 1 piece,
no-brainer.
right? That's like so that's like practically free.
Do you realize like people looking externally, internally see people like us like psychos?
Oh, like it's insane. The
like,
behavior makes it's absolutely insane. I mean, and you brought up
oh,
Party Bit, right? Like all the behaviors from the outside looking in is nuts. Like Party Bid with the like the zombie punk
right.
auction, right? Like Party of the Living Dead brought in 400 plus complete internet strangers to lock $3 million into, like more than $3 million
Like
into to bid collectively on a picture of a, like it's the whole thing. Like if you try to tell that story to someone who's not in crypto, is just like mind blowing.
Like talk about like crowdfunding 4.0. Like like we skipped 3.0. We're going straight to 4.0. Like 2.0 is like Kickstarter, right? It's
Yeah.
actually crazy to imagine a bunch of strangers on the internet, probably all collectively living across crypto Twitter, right?
Yeah.
The avenues of
Yeah.
crypto Twitter, see and align with a movement, a community of scarcity, right? And rarity, and understand the value behind being early adopters, right? Like, because it pays to be an early adopter, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Participating, spending
Yes.
all this ETH,
Yes.
it pays. It's part of the journey.
Yeah.
And when you're so into it so early on, like I don't know, it's fulfilling for me for whatever reason. Like that's why I don't mind spending that ETH on gas, on random ass JPEGs, on whatever it may be. And that's I feel like why I'm so hesitant to spend real world money is because it's just the excitement and the
Yeah.
idea of like I'm contributing to something. I'm bringing something to fruition that was never done before, right?
Yeah,
And
I think there's something culturally really interesting about NFTs that people didn't foresee, which is originally like, the promise of blockchain and the promise of crypto is like, oh, you do everything on the blockchain. You're basically doing everything in public. And that's like, that brings transparency, right? And transparency means trust. But I think what people forgot is like, we're all like still very primitive monkeys. And like when we actually do things in public, like we do it for the status, like we're like doing it for the flex, and we're doing it to actually signal publicly like who we're aligned with, what we're aligned with, like what our ideology is when we purchase something. And that something is effectively broadcast across the entire internet. Like, back to this point about collectibles and NFTs not really being collectibles. Like if I were to purchase a Beanie Baby, I would have to, it's kind of like a push model of like, I have to tell people, otherwise who knows, I just bought it in private. But NFTs are public by default, like it's broadcast by default, right? And so like you're really living like and broadcasting your digital life all the time, and that sort of social interaction is something kind of beyond which we've seen before.
yeah, I was for whatever reason, I used to collect Beanie Babies. I also used to be very fat, and I used to eat like out a lot as a kid. And I'd always go to the Cheesecake Factory, and every time you'd go to the Cheesecake Factory, you'd see Beanie Babies. And for whatever reason, there was just
why were they selling them in the restaurant?
always, like there would be the cheesecake fridge, right? And then right next to it would be the Beanie Babies. I don't like. I don't know why, but that was just the model for whatever
Okay.
reason. Okay.
Okay.
Because like think about it, whether or not Cheesecake had like the Cheesecake Factory had a stake in Beanie Babies and understood the game of flipping stuffed
Yeah.
animals, or it was more of a community thing that they were trying to align with, that
Yeah.
Beanie Babies were so hot, it would be like a plus, like we're on the cool side of things. You
I'm
know what I
gonna
mean?
Google this afterwards.
You
I
have
really had
to.
no idea this was a
I'm
thing.
telling you, I'm telling you. But
Yeah.
anyways, not to get too much on the Beanie Baby side. I want you to kind of paint me a picture. What's the current state of the NFT market? We're seeing OpenSea this week announce, and it's the week of what? Right now, it's Friday, August 20th that we're recording. This week, OpenSea announced that they surpassed Etsy in total transaction volume, which is actually insane, and it's kind of understandable because the average price per JPEG is obviously in the millions or in the hundreds of thousands. It like doesn't compare the products that people buy on OpenSea to Etsy. Okay, so that's for starters. But what's the current state of the market?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, OpenSea is insane. I think it's more than $1 billion transacted in the last 30 days. 100K registered users, which if you do the math, it's like the average JPEG is like $10,000, which is
Like,
which is insane in USD terms, but not so insane.
it's not. That's like a few
You're like,
ETH. Like it's
yeah,
not
you're
a
like
big deal.
3 ETH. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, okay, so I would say there's a couple different categories of NFT art that's going on, right? There's kind of the profile picture league, where it's not really about profile pictures. It's really you're buying club memberships, right? You're spending like thousands of dollars to be part of the club.
Yeah.
And the club, and that's why you have people out here being like, hey, I joined Bored Apes, like follow me, right? This is a community. This is like not to mention it's also a distribution channel. Like if you look at the Hundreds, which is doing just like a streetwear.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Streetwear
Collab
brand.
with the Bored Ape. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to be dropping apparel for, just Bored Ape apparel, right? You don't have to be in this Bored Ape Yacht Club to actually access it, but that's actually a distribution channel. Like there's actually, real monetary value in this community. So I would say like the first bucket is kind of community-based NFTs where everyone coalesces around some kind of common identity. I think there's also a lot of stuff happening in the kind of generative art space, like art blocks, and kind of creating almost like accidental art, but still I think there's this kind of like community aspect with generative art, which is interesting. And then there's kind of like the one of ones. There's the art community there. I feel like this kind of broadly is, one is like community based and one is like artist based or like creator based. And I think that there's another thing that's kind of coming along, which is how do NFTs really get plugged into DeFi? Like NFTs at the end of the day, they may be art, they may be collectibles, they may be whatever, they may be pieces of writing on Mirror, but they're assets, right? They're assets, they're financial products. And so there's kind of this category of things that are looking at NFTs as assets, kind of like fractional, which you talked about before. And how can we actually introduce liquidity? How can we introduce better pricing models for rare or kind of tail NFT assets? And how can these things be then plugged back into the DeFi ecosystem? I think that's probably what I would say is like this really interesting unlock that's going to be happening, where, for the longest time, you've had kind of two parallel tracks. You've had the DeFi community and you've had the NFT community. And there's definitely been like cross collaboration. Like, I think that's maybe what made Axie Infinity very interesting is I remember, back when Uniswap did their retroactive drop of their Uni tokens, some Axie players actually ended up getting Uni tokens because they inadvertently interacted with Uniswap through playing Axie Infinity, through, kind of just like earning SLP, swapping SLP. Like that's super cool, right? There's that kind of thing that's going on. I think like, Yield Guild, for example, is looking at how can we actually loan out the NFT assets that we own. And then these NFT assets are actually cash, they're they have like a cash flow attached to them through these play to earn games. And then how do we kind of capture some of that cash flow? So there's been kind of some interactions, but I think the true unlock where kind of this like real marriage between DeFi and NFTs hasn't really happened yet. And I think fractional and like, kind of that category of things is really leading the way. But we really haven't seen the true unlock.
What's up, guys? Adam Levy here. Sorry for the quick pause, but I want to give some love to our 5 NFT sponsors who are making this episode happen. They are Coinvise, POAP, Cello, Social Stack, and PrimeDAO. First off, on Coinvise, you can create a personal or community-owned social token on Ethereum. Coinvise also helps you create incentives through token rewards and bounties, NFT business models, and bot integrations for Discord. Discover more by visiting coinvise.co today. Next up, we have POAP, or short for Proof of Attendance Protocol, who enables a novel way of creating one's life diary. Leveraging NFT technology, POAP facilitates an easy way to mint non-fungible tokens related to meaningful events. It's frequently used in crypto-native communities, and now it's starting to create NFT collectors in the mainstream too. Collect or launch your own POAP today by visiting poap.xyz. Next up, we have Social Stack, a platform for communities, brands, and creators to build mission-driven social token economies. Offering an easy-to-use, non-custodial wallet with a suite of open-source community engagement tools, Social Stack makes it simple to bring your community into Web3 and be a part of creating an open-source, gratitude-driven future for social tokens. Create a free social token wallet, discover mission-driven social token communities, or apply to launch your own token on Social Stack by visiting socialstack.co today. Next up, we have Cello. Are you looking for an ecosystem of dApps, currencies, and tokens that can connect you with people no matter their device, carrier, or country? Well, say hello to Cello, a mobile-first platform that makes crypto dApps and payments accessible to anyone with a mobile phone. Cello supports thousands of projects from builders, developers, and artists who every day build applications and issue tokens from all over the world. Visit celo.org today to learn more. And last but not least, we have PrimeDAO, a collective of DeFi builders and DAO veterans attempting to turn DeFi into a more cooperative ecosystem by creating DAO-to-DAO interactions. The first solution to go live is Prime Launch, a launchpad experience for DAOs built in collaboration with Balancer. If you plan on launching a DAO, head over to prime.xyz to access a network of partners and tools that will jumpstart your DAO development today. All right, back to the episode. Yeah, I want to touch upon the first point that you brought up of Bored Ape Yacht Club doing a collab with the Hundreds, doing a merch drop specifically for their community. And I know you mentioned, for whatever reason, I saw online that you have to be a member of BAYC to access the t-shirts.
You might be right. I'm not sure. I thought it was, so there was like a Bored Ape merch drop that was separate where it's like, you have to, right. It's like literally go token gated where you have to prove and then you can purchase.
Right.
I thought the Hundreds was open to everyone, but I actually could be wrong on that.
I from what I remember, I saw a tweet from the Hundreds that said it's exclusive to BAYC members.
Oh, interesting.
And which makes this whole entire concept even more interesting because I know the artist Mad Dog Jones was the first to really experiment with this of upselling his existing collectors, right? And making them even more super fans beyond of what they already were. And BAYC is now doing collabs with mainstream brands and is kind of like building themselves to be the supreme of NFTs. Mm-hmm. That's what it kind of feels like, right? Now, this whole concept maybe and I only bring this up because the majority of these listeners are creators, right? They're thinking about how can I make the transition from Web 2 to Web 3? And you're talking to me about cartoon monkeys. Like, how does this how does this tie to me? So let's think bigger picture for a minute, all right? I want to experiment and brainstorm with you. So this whole concept of launching a membership badge that appreciates in value or depreciates depending on the market replies, and then taking it one step further, having the hardcore community, doing surprise airdrops and rewarding people for being hardcore members, aka the dogs, right? And now doing more mainstream collaborations with the Hundreds and releasing culture approved merch, right? It's the ultimate epitome of clout, essentially. Okay. how can this be applied to, let's say, a more mainstream influencer like Kylie Jenner, for example? Okay. Let's say Kylie were to drop membership badges, okay, that all the Kylie fans across Instagram, her millions and hundreds of millions of followers would buy into this badge.
Yeah.
And then she would create, like, bounce some ideas with me here. She would, let's say, do a collab with Sephora, okay? And she'd say, let's do a unique makeup line specifically for my biggest fans, and only those who have my membership badge can buy this makeup kit, right?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
see something like that come into fruition down the line?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's absolutely going to happen. And I think the way, yeah, I actually, I'm very opinionated on actually how these communities form. And I think what you mentioned is almost, it's like a social token, right? Where it's like Kylie
Yeah.
launched some sort of social token. It could be a ERC20, or maybe she launches on another chain. But I actually think the reason why NFT communities are so passionate and so special is because it's not a token. Like it's, I mean, it is a token, obviously, but it's not, it's a unique asset with like an image that you can kind of emotionally resonate with, which you can't do with an ERC20 token. So I actually feel like the way that creators are going to be able to leverage their communities is through like some sort of badges or some sort of NFT based thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think for there's kind of two aspects. There's like, how do you enrich your community and your fans, and then kind of like, how do you really engage with them? I think on the enriching part, you know, I feel like what's going to happen is you're going to have musicians, for example, creating their music masters as NFTs, perhaps fractionalizing that, right? And then people who own fractionalized shards of this music master may be able to generate streaming revenue. Or, you know, or it doesn't have to be music, right? Maybe it's the commercial rights to a specific ape, or to Kylie Jenner's, you know, maybe a Kylie Jenner cartoon character that might be optioned for a movie, right? And what if that were fractionalized and you actually get revenue based on how this IP is used?
Powerful.
Yeah, I think that would
Yeah.
be super, super interesting. And then I think there's kind of this community aspect where, or engagement aspect, where right now most NFTs are pretty static. And this is where I think async art has done a really amazing job, and not getting a ton of recognition. They definitely get some recognition, but they invented this concept. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is they invented this concept of layering for NFTs, where a certain NFT can have multiple layers. So you can imagine for an album cover, for example, right? Let's say Drake is going to create a new album. His album cover has like a background and a foreground. You know, maybe the background is like, you know, like this beautiful nature scenery, and then the foreground is like some cartoon characters.
Yeah.
What if every single aspect of that was actually an NFT? And so like layered together, it creates a cohesive whole.
Yeah.
And if you owned the background, you can change it from night to day. You can change it from New York to Tokyo. You can change it, you know, like you have the power to actually change this album cover in some way. So I feel like this, like there's still a lot of play and experimentation we can do. And then also I think for creators, what if you can alter, sorry, I don't know if you hear
No
this.
worries.
Let me try
No
to
worries.
get out of
You
this.
know, as you quit out of that really quick, that's like,
Yeah.
that's a whole new token standard, right? Stacking collectibles and basically non-fungible tokens on top of one another, whether they be eyeglasses, right? Or whether they be rings, or whether they be that are interchangeable. But yeah, okay, continue.
Yeah, but I think that can be applied to the community as a whole as well, right? Where it's like, let's say you're the oldest followers of a certain celebrity, like maybe that means you get accessorized in a special way,
Mm-hmm.
that the NFT that you own actually grows and develops as kind of the community grows. And I think those are all sorts of really interesting things where fans can get recognized for the contribution that they make. And that can happen, that can happen through NFTs. And I think there's no real way for that to happen at scale today for creators and their fan bases.
I've had a lot of people on the show so far and have talked and interviewed a lot of people. That's actually a very like practical use case of applying what these cartoon drops are doing to a real life example, being able to interchange different components of an album color, issuing those as NFTs, and having unique components, unique traits to the album color cover. And even if you would take it one step further and do like extended versions of songs, on some drops, right? Versus none, like which one's explicit, which one's not explicit, right?
Oh, that's so cool. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
Like that's like, now we're going down a rabbit hole that the possibilities are endless. But here's the issue. Like creators are not thinking like that just yet. You're seeing founders innovate. And I recall like talking to like 4 projects that are working on the element of tokenizing musicians and tokenizing their albums, basically, okay? And figuring out the whole fractionalization of royalties, bringing that off-chain payment on-chain, okay? Yeah. But again, creators don't get this. Creators typically want to focus on the creative. They want to focus on rapping, on drawing. Yeah. And they have their managerial team that kind of handle the rest. So how do we kind of get more managers, right? And more artists accumulated with what's happening in the space to be more ballsy, right? To be more risk-taking. What do you think is the right solution for that? And part 2 is, what do you think is stifling that?
That's such an interesting question. And I agree. Because right now, like in order to really design well some of these mechanisms that we talked about, it's almost a piece of performance art in itself, right? It's like, it's kind of a full-time thing to be able to design that. And if your full-time thing is actually photography, or your full-time thing is actually music, like designing the community interactions, designing the incentive layer, designing the reward, the reward mechanisms, that is a very, very heavy lift. I think, I wonder if I wonder if what will actually happen is some creators will experiment and achieve kind of like the playbook for how this is done. I know Justin Blau, for example, has done a lot for his music NFTs. He tweeted out kind of enigmatically that his NFT follower, his NFT holders can kind of get rights to in some way. So, I think some artists are going to end up pushing the boundary and proving out certain models. And I think those models will become the playbook. And then once the playbook is established, everyone else probably will just be able to adopt it, right? In that here's five playbooks. And so whoever ends up writing one of these playbooks early will win asymmetrically, but everyone else who follows that playbook would obviously also benefit. But yeah, I do think it is a big lift, and it means veering off the creative path a little bit, or whatever kind of, art or creation that you're doing, to think in a very specialized and deep way about game theory and incentives, which is a big ask.
It's a problem, because us as people who are kind of living and breathing the space on a daily basis, we see all the opportunities of how people can basically get help, right? And experiment and monetize their communities in different ways. And like the best example that comes to mind right now of like a industry milestone or a breaking news kind of thing is OnlyFans annihilating the core users who built their brand and their name, right? Yeah. And like basically flipping the switch, just like Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, all these Web2 platforms can do. And now I can only imagine how many porn stars are going to be basically thinking about launching their own social token and created token gated content, right? And so, and I already see people like tweeting who's building the OnlyFans for crypto,
I see that a lot.
But it's interesting how all these things will kind of intertwine. If porn stars start issuing their own social tokens, how does that intertwine into DeFi? Are they going to start like issuing like lending and borrowing pools on Aave, for their for whatever their
or
porn
you can
star
index across the space, right?
Or index and create like a porn star index
too.
Like that's funny as hell. I'd buy into that just for the sake.
I don't think it's that crazy. Like every single kind of technological advancement we've had, like video streaming, like, you know, kind of like the internet. Like a lot of this was pushed by, honestly, the porn industry. Like they've always been on the cutting edge
Always.
of technology.
The internet, right? That was
Yeah.
like the
Or like the
first
way
thing.
that ads are delivered through videos, like that,
Right.
you know, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious to see what happens with that use case.
Yeah.
I want to talk about what are some of your favorite NFT use cases that extend beyond land, like digital land, music, and art. Like, what are some of the more experimentative things that you've seen either creators, communities dabble with and make a lot of noise behind?
I think there's going to be a lot of power in collective storytelling. So I think Aku is a really good example of this, where the Aku character is a 10-year-old boy. He dreams of being an astronaut. And the idea is that there can be actually a community DAO behind deciding storylines for what Aku ends up doing. And I think that's going to be, you know, incredibly interesting for storytelling and for media going forward. There was another idea that was tweeted earlier. I want to cite him correctly. Maybe we can tag it afterwards or something, because I want to make sure it's actually attributed to the right person. But
Sure. Yeah.
you know, zero X Jim something. I think that's his Twitter handle. And he had this idea of, what if we had this, you know, manga series where every single character is an NFT, and fans can kind of coalesce around these characters, and then you can kind of create narratives around them. I think it's, you know, I actually feel like this sort of community created content is going to change the way that media works in the future. Like, it's going to change the way you know, Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and all of these platforms work, and the way that we consume the way that we consume media. Like, think of the fervor around Game of Thrones, right? Like, if you actually had, like, maybe through staking like Game of Thrones tokens against certain characters in battles, right? Like, you know, there was this like Battle of the Night, or, you know, there's like all these epic battles in Game of Thrones. And what if you could stake tokens against who would be the winner, or like stake tokens to give them special weapons to use during the show? Like that would be really, really interesting. And
Imagine you could do that live with the WWE. Like, like that just came to mind. Imagine you could basically stake tokens, and then mid fight, you would determine whether or not the dude hits the other dude or girl with a chair, right? And
I would watch that. Yeah, I mean, you kind of want to drop, like, I think actually, like, you want to do item drops, right? Where it's like, if you stake enough tokens, like, this guy gets a banana to, like, I don't know,
throw on the floor and cause him to slip. Like,
yeah. I think this sort of participation is just going to change the way like content is created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I love that. That's a good point of view. I want to dive into something you're really excited about. You kind of talked about it briefly, scatteredly throughout, but I want to bring it up. So you talked about the intersection of DeFi and NFTs. So I want to pull up a tweet that you wrote. Okay. So this is from August 8th, 3:40 p.m. I'll shoot it a like as well, boost it a little, give it some love. Okay. The next thing in NFTs plus DeFi will be under-collateralized social lending in NFT communities. Social lending works in emerging markets without robust credit scoring systems, but didn't work in crypto because of the lack of on-chain communities. And then below that, you put Dead, which is the Dead punk that was through PartyBid, and then you tagged Bored Ape Yacht Club, and then you mentioned communities like that, right? Can you talk a little bit about what you're kind of referring to more in depth from that tweet?
Yeah, I have never had anyone pull up a tweet during a conversation this week. This is actually really cool. So let's think about what credit is, right? Like, credit is basically trust. Credit is saying, I trust you to give me this money back plus something else, you know, plus some. Give me my original money back plus some. And the way that trust is established today, like in, for example, in the United States, it's through credit systems and credit scores. And you do that through repeated purchasing history and kind of repeated activity, whether you're renting an apartment or whatever. And all of that gets logged on chain or logged in the database somewhere. And the reason why you can even accumulate this score is because you have one identity, right? Like you can only ever have like one social security number. So you're tied to that identity, and that identity can be tied to a scoring system that effectively it's flawed in many ways, but the aim of such a system is to tell people how trustworthy you are in this credit and lending system. And in emerging economies where you may not have such a robust, in the United States, there are entire industries dedicated to the credit score. In other emerging economies, you may not have entire industries dedicated to credit. And so you actually have small scale communities doing community-based lending and saying that like, hey, I'm a member of this community. You're a member of this community. We live in the same village. I know you're not going to up and move. I'm going to lend you some money because I know you're good for it, because we're attached in some way, right? And in crypto, lending just has a really hard time taking off because there is no identity. There's no, I can make as many wallets as I want, right? And each wallet can have a different set of actions that I've taken on chain, and I can abandon any wallet anytime that I want. And so I can't tie it down to one identity. That makes credit scoring incredibly difficult. So barring that, I think the flip side is like, okay, so then can you do community-based lending? And there's been some really early, I'm struggling to think of the name, but there was definitely like a really early example of this, I think back in 2018, where it was literally a network where, I would pull someone in and I would say, I'm going to underwrite him. Like, I know he's good for it. And if he doesn't pay it back, then I also get slashed. Like it was like basically some incentive system, but it didn't really take off for whatever reason. And I think the problem is that like, I would still have to know that person in real life in some way. And like, I still need to like have some sort of relationship. So is there actually some sort of decentralized, trustless way of establishing a community to say to someone, hey, like you're good for it without even knowing an identity? Like it's actually a really, really tough problem. And so that's why it's been really hard to have under-collateralized lending or credit in crypto. But I think the emergent property of these communities like Bored Apes, as silly as it is, the Bored Ape community is a very cohesive, your identity is determined by the ape that you own in your wallet. And I wonder if there's some way to say like, hey, if you've held your ape for a year, right, and you haven't touched in this wallet, can actually receive some sort of loan from someone else in the Bored Ape community. Or like if you hold dead tokens for a certain amount of time, and you can kind of mix and match conditions, right? You can say, okay, what if you own a Bored Ape and you're a big liquidity provider on, Uniswap or something, and you're an active governance participant in this DAO, then then you are able to receive a loan in some way. So I think there's something interesting about now that you've formed identities actually around cartoon characters, that there actually might be a way to do lending within these communities.
Do you think people are starting to realize the potential behind DeFi and NFTs? I know there's a few startups already exploring it, but do you think more of like the more inner circle crypto community has started realizing like what this could become? Or do you think people have yet to still experience that aha moment?
I think we're somewhere in the middle. I think there's a really healthy contingent of people who are like, oh yeah, this is big. Like once DeFi and NFTs like merge, we're looking at like the most viral financial product we've ever seen in the history of humanity. But I think there are also a lot of people in crypto who have been in crypto for years, right? Who are like the OGs who are actually quite skeptical of NFTs. So I think that, that's obviously contingent. So even within the crypto community, I don't think all people agree that NFTs are interesting or worth further consideration. Yeah, and then outside of NFTs, obviously there are a lot of skeptics.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean,
sure.
I think we're still early, but what will happen is I think there's enough of a contingent of people who are true believers in this merging of NFTs and DeFi, to start pushing the envelope on experiments like Party DAO, right? Again, great example, or Party Bid, like great example of that happening, where you merged NFTs with DeFi to create something super interesting that no one's ever seen before. And I think as more and more of those experiments come to be, I think people will learn through example.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know we're coming close to our time, so I wanna hit you with a final question, even though I have so much more planned. You're like a pool of knowledge, but we'll get it next time. So I'll leave you with this, okay? So I'm a big fan of like innovation history, internet history, whatever you want to call it. Okay. And I really enjoy learning about the development of the internet from Web 1 to Web 2, Web 2.5, and now the emergence of Web 3.
What
And
was
it's
2.5? I've actually never heard that.
like people like balance between Web 2 and Web 2.5 being the social media side and the social side of the internet.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I've heard like Gary Vee publicly say like, oh, social media is like the 2.5 and like et cetera, et cetera. So when Web 1 came out, or when the internet came out, people were calling it internet. They weren't calling it the internet, right? And the whole idea of what it could become was very vague. Email started coming out, and it was very much like a read-only type of environment, okay?
Yeah.
Web 2 came out and introduced social networks, Web 2.5, Web 2.0, introduced more community-like life, right? You also had the emergence of Uber, Lyft, a lot of central platforms, and the discussions around data ownership, okay, took place. And now you're having the emergence of Web3. And Web 2 ate Web 1. Web 3 is going to eat Web 2, right? My question to you, what's going to eat Web 3?
That's such a good question. You mean Web3 is not the end all be all? We should just just call it web, period.
Like
That's it.
Like what is like
we're done.
Yeah. Like what's Web 4? Like what is that? Like is that I've gotten various answers. I'll continue milking this for just a minute. I've gotten once all data is on chain, then we're gonna reach problems, like, and then Web 4 is gonna aim to solve so much data on chain, what that looks like, But how do you feel about that? And maybe we can even take this from a point of view of like, how does Electric Capital see that? Maybe.
Yeah, I think this is such an interesting question. I think what Web3 fundamentally solves is how can we create a functioning incentive layer at scale in a potentially adversarial environment, right? So it can weather all sorts of adversaries. It can weather distrust. Like it doesn't really matter. This incentive system will hold. I think that's what Web3 is all about. And once you have this incentive system, you can do revenue sharing, right? And that's how you can kind of unbundle YouTube, and you can kind of topple Facebook, and you can kind of topple all of these kind of more extractive platforms that really profited off of creators, while the creators didn't really profit off of it. And I kind of think that, I wonder if I don't know. I think Web 4 might be, everyone's kind of living in some sort of multiverse. And everyone is living their lives digitally. And I think I think the reason why this question is a good one is because it's really hard to imagine what the problems might look like when that is the case, right? When we live our entire lives digitally, when we transact digitally, and the relationships we form are kind of at scale, and we can have multiple identities as well, and multiple different kind of personas that we live out really full, enriching lives online. This kind of makes me think that there was this really funny, I think it's like in ancient Greece or something, where someone was writing kind of like the ancient Greek version of like sci-fi, right? Where it's like, okay, what if some sort of being we've never met before, like how can we travel to their land? And we'll travel to their land through like ships. Because that was like the longest mode of transportation that they could have foreseen. Like they obviously couldn't have foreseen like planes, right? It wouldn't be like flying. It would just definitely be like we would travel to other world through ships. And I think it's just, yeah, it's a little bit hard to see into the future and even anticipate what sort of problems we would have once that happens. I do think though that pendulum kind of swings back and forth between centralization and decentralization. And the trade-off is that centralization is efficient, but decentralization allows for trustless transactions to happen, right? And we're effectively trading off efficiency for the ability to interact with strangers, for 400 strangers to be able to lock up $3 million. Like we did that probably in kind of an inefficient way, but it made it possible. And so right now the pendulum is kind of swinging into the decentralization camp because a lot of the institutions that we've trusted for a really long time turns out to be extractive or to turn out to be, or like if you look at like the way government functions today, like, it feels like it's a little slow, or it feels like it's not meeting certain needs. And so I think, or colleges where people feel like, wow, I'm paying all these heavy tuitions, but like, what am I getting out of it? So I think there's just been this like a little bit of a crumbling of trust in centralization, right? So now we're kind of swinging into decentralization. And I wonder once we're completely decentralized, I wonder if people are going to be like, wait, this is very inefficient. Wouldn't it be more efficient if we centralize things? And so I kind of wonder if we're going to swing back the other way. And just swing back, it's like that's why history rhymes, right? Like it's because we're living in cycles effectively.
But if we're playing on that analogy and we're talking about just a pendulum swinging, at some point the pendulum and its momentum kind of meets the middle, right? And what is I don't want to continue. I know we're limited on time, but something to think about. I'll leave you with. What does it look like when the pendulum stays in the middle between decentralization and centralization? Crypto Twitter is the epitome of decentralization. The rest of the world is the epitome of centralization. But I think that's a perfect place to leave off. Anybody that's listening and wants to contribute to what does the middle look like, DM me, tweet at me. I'd love to hear your feedback. But Maria, before I let you go, thank you so much for being on. What an awesome conversation. Quickly plug yourself and where we can find you and the projects you're working on.
Yeah, sure. So I invest in crypto projects, especially NFT projects, especially things looking at creators, and looking at these new social communities and looking at the intersection of NFTs and DeFi. So I'm very, very actively investing in that in a firm called Electric Capital. You can DM me on Twitter. My DMs are open. I'm at Maria Shen. Or my email is maria@electriccapital.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being on, Maria. I hope to do a follow-up in a future season.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun conversation. I really appreciate it.
Of course.